am super excited to have you on the show today. I just told everyone a little bit about what you're up to and your story. I am so excited to share a little bit more about all these different topics. But first, we got to get to know you a little bit. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about where your life started and how you came up?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Lauren. I'm excited to be here this morning. And let's see, it all started in Los Angeles. That's where I was born and raised. I was born in Inglewood, and I'm an identical twin, and I have three older brothers. My mom started having kids very early. She was 15 when she had her first son and got married. And she was 24 by the time she had us, the number four, number five. And so it was tough. And by the time we were born, she was no longer with the boy's father. And we were living in a house in Inglewood. And when she had girls, the boys were already starting to get involved with gangs. It was a pretty kind of hard neighborhood in the 60s, that she figured out how to get us into West Hollywood. And so she moved the family there. The girls were the motivation, she says. And we moved there when we were 4 and lived there until we went to college. So it was a pretty, single mom, matriarchal grandma, my grandmother, her mother. The two of them were always in my life. And in fact, we called our grandmother Mom because my mom was gone so much. She was a performer and was overseas in the USO during Vietnam. And just had this passion to sing. And it was really, she's one of those people who cannot not do her art. And so she was gone a lot. And so our grandmother raised us. And it was a pretty interesting way to grow up. But when you don't know any different, it was, my grandmother was amazing, and we fought like crazy, and my brothers made us tough. That you don't come home crying, you go back out and you take care of business if you need to, if someone's picking on you. So, I definitely am grateful for those lessons now, for sure, as an adult, that they instilled in us. But it was, looking back, you realize that just wasn't the way that, it wasn't what we were seeing on TV. It was definitely not traditional, but maybe far too traditional for Black families, which is, a whole nother story about how, families are separated due to a lot of the legislations that are in place. And so you end up having single moms raising, kids because of the mass incarceration. There's so many reasons, but I just think that it was, it's far too common that our Black kids are growing up that way.
It is definitely far too common. To circle back, one of the things you mentioned was, she just figured it out. She figured out how to get us to Hollywood. There's a lot of just figuring it out sometimes for people. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of like how you all were figuring out the financial piece of it? If she was traveling frequently, was your grandmother responsible for you all financially then? And then that like you said, sounds like you all stayed together despite, there being a situation where maybe you could have been split up and it might have been easier because there were so many of you.
Yeah, the figuring out was there was no one. My grandmother, my mother, my grandmother was born in 1912, so that'll give you an idea of, Jim Crow, Alabama, migrated to Ohio in the Great Migration, and then had my mom there, and then they moved to California. And so there was no real money, like lessons. No one was teaching them how to manage money. They just were hustlers. Like, you just got to go out of there and you just got to hustle, you got to make it work. So my grandmother used to clean houses, for a living, because that was really only occupation she could have back in those days. And my mom wanted to be a singer, but she was very, my mom was gorgeous, and she was very petite, and she loved the blues. And a lot of the criticism was that she was too young to sing the blues. And so she was always just like trying to figure out how to make ends meet. When we were 11, my grandmother had a stroke. And so we were 11. My oldest brother was 19. The next one was 18. The next one was 17. My mom came home for a little bit. She was living in Europe at that time. She went there to work and kind of stayed. And she came home for a little bit to kind of sort my grandmother out. And then she left, but my grandmother was in the bed. She could no longer, we had her check. She got Social Security, and then her husband was military. So she had those benefits, but that was really all there was. And then she would work and clean and do things like that. So when she wasn't able to work again, and the five of us were there was literally this family meeting that said, okay, we don't want CPS to come and take you away because there's no adult in the house. So we all, one, you got to behave, and then two, everyone's got to work. And so my first job was at 12, working literally at, it was called Flippers Roller Skate or Roller Boogie Palace on La Cienega and Santa Monica. And I was a skate guard. I first got hired as a bar back because we were big. I mean, I was 5'7" already, 5'9", 135 pounds.
At 12 years old.
At 12 years old. And so they hired us. And they hired me. I got the job first, and then they realized that I might not be old enough to be a bar back. And so, but by that time they really liked me. And so they moved me over to skate guard, and that was my job. And so I would work from like 6 at night till 2 a.m, and then go home, wake up to go to school. I was in junior high school, either walk or take the bus, depending on if we had a bus pass, and come back. And so the deal was that we had to earn our own money to pay for our food and to do whatever we needed to. And the boys would pay for the mortgage in the house and all the bills. And so that was kind of the agreement. And then I think by the time we were 14, 15, all of them moved out. So it was just my sister and I in the house alone until we finished high school. And we just worked.
With the financial responsibilities. Yeah.
And they still took care of the mortgage, and they took care of that, but they just weren't in the house. And so I remember getting my first bank account, and that was probably and I think it was a teacher who helped me do it. Literally, like my middle school teachers were super influential in my life, financially, just like how to navigate all that craziness. And they took me to the bank and helped me open my first bank account at Security Pacific Bank. And that was the first notion I had of even like that you should save money. Because like I can tell you, my mama doesn't know nothing about saving money. and I love my mom, so I'm not bagging on her, but that was not a lesson we were getting for her. So, this idea of saving money and having money for a rainy day kind of thing was something that, kind of my middle school teachers taught us about, and just said, you can't just spend the money as fast as it comes. You got to save it for other things.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about the notion of the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And,
yes,
we don't all learn everything we need to from our parents. And everybody has various levels of skill. So there's some areas that someone, who may be your main caretaker may be lacking, but there's someone else that can, kind of step in and fill that gap. And so it's so cool to be able to have, a school system or, a set of teachers that cared enough to be able to say, hey, like, we understand your situation, let me teach you what I know so that you can have some semblance of, how to be able to survive going forward, because money is something everybody's going to have to deal with at some point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is that village. Without that village, I'm not sure where we would have been. So, yeah.
And so what were conversations like about what was supposed to happen in life after high school? Was there a conversation about college? Was there a thought of college? And,
so I think this is what's really fascinating in my family is that, so no one in my family had ever gone to college. Except for this was a conversation since I can remember that was had that we were going to college. And I'm not sure where that came from. Like, it was never a question of whether or not the twins were going to college.
Yeah, specifically the twins, not all of the siblings.
Not all it was the twins. And it was a rallying around the girls that I can't really explain, but we're very boy heavy in my family, not just like even the kids of my siblings. There's 16 nieces and nephews and only 4 girls. So it's very boy heavy, but it was just like, you're going to college. I remember bringing home in high school a C. We were relatively good students considering, and our grades usually fell because of just being so tired and working. but I remember bringing home a C and my brother looking at me and literally just like slapping me. And I was like, what was that for? He goes, that's a C. And I said, well, C is average. He goes, well, who in the hell ever said you were average? Where they got that from, I don't know. But this idea that we were going to college. So we figured out, though, financially, it was not going to happen. And luckily, my sister and I were very athletic, and we started playing sports in middle school and in high school. Really honed in. I played volleyball and softball. My sister played basketball, volleyball, and softball. And she was an '84, the number one recruit or number two recruit for basketball in the nation and number three recruit for volleyball in the nation. And then I was somewhere in there because I had a little different, things going on, but I was recruited. So we both she ended up at UCLA and I ended up at USIU in San Diego on full scholarships. And that's how we got our education. But we knew it was very clear to us that the only way it was going to happen was through us making this effort. And so again, being nurtured around, you have a talent, you're really good at this. This is the way, this is your ticket out really of this kind of historical poverty that my family had lived in since I can remember.
And I think that is something that resonates with a lot of people, the idea that sports is a way to be able to get that ticket out of poverty. And we don't talk about that part as much as let's go off to college and let's become something. Like sometimes people are trying to escape an environment and create something better for a family in the future by using those sports. It's not so much that they want to be, I hear personally the narrative of, I want to be a basketball player, I want to be a football player, and people kind of turning their nose up to that, but they don't realize that there's a deeper narrative behind, what is trying to be accomplished by getting the opportunity to get the scholarship to be able to get out.
Absolutely. And also understanding, my first teaching job was in juvenile hall, and it was mostly Black and brown kids. And, I would talk to them about the importance of money and planning and in education, if that's what they desired. But in education, somehow it may not be the traditional 4-year, but there had to be something where you can hone a skill so that you could start to earn money and change your circumstances. But, I had kids in juvenile hall saying, I'm going to play for the NFL. I'm like, there's no way. And it's not because I'm trying to knock you down, but you're locked up. So you got to get out of here. You're not training. You're not doing what you need to do so that dream can happen. Right. And so also that unrealistic narrative that's kind of pigeonholed people of color to say the only way out of your poverty is through sports. Right. And instead of saying that, what, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be whatever the heck you want to be, but you just have to have the supports beneath you to be able to achieve that. And you have to know what it is that you're good at and start thinking about it. So
I love it. Like you said, there's so many prongs and so much more that goes into it than what people see sometimes on the outside as we think through those things.
Yeah.
When you got to college, what was it like? Did you notice anything different about money, or did you start to think differently about money and, having changed environments from being in that household and having to, work, and now you're off on college? Was it different?
Well, it was different because I was a little bit of a fool, I have to say, because, the thing is that when you're in a full scholarship and, there's food regularly on your table. I mean, so food scarcity was a real thing in my family, growing up. I think I always call myself the unintended vegetarian because having meat was like a special thing, but it was always like rice and canned, vegetables growing up. So when I got to college, having access to 3 meals a day that were, I won't necessarily say healthy, but, you had access to healthy food. It was just kind of like this breath of fresh air, really, to just take a breath. I mean, when I had worked from 12 to 17, I got to college at 17. And that was the first time since I was a kid that I didn't have to work. My work was my sport. And so, honestly, I don't, outside of planning for my future, because I knew early on that I wanted to be in some kind of social services. At the time, I thought I was going to be a social worker. Outside of planning for what my career was going to be, I can honestly say that I didn't really think about money. I didn't have much of it. The one thing about, scholarships is, is that they give you money to be there, but there's no extra money to live. And so I was broke all the time because there was no one sending us money. And then you start to understand the whole like FAFSA and your like all those things I didn't know. You fill out all these applications, you do all this stuff. I didn't have to pay for school, but there was no money. And then I finally, somewhere around my junior year, I started reading my FAFSA documents that I had to do. And it said that there had to be a family contribution because my brother was claiming my sister and I on his taxes, my oldest brother. And he was supposed to be contributing like $5,000 a year, and they were expecting that. And I'm like, dude, you need to be giving us money. And he's like, I don't have the money. And I'm like, well, then you can't claim us on your taxes because you're taking away our opportunity. And you just, because we didn't have anyone who knew this or anyone before us, any predecessor to help us understand. My brother wasn't trying to hurt us. He didn't know, he was trying to help himself. And he was the kind of the patriarch of the family, not by design, but just the way it worked out, that he didn't know he was hurting us and we didn't know he was supposed to be contributing. And so here we are at college with not a penny, literally not a penny to do anything. And so I had some really good friends, again, that village concept, right? Really good friends who did have, money at different various levels of money. And they just knew that if I was going to be there, they were going to have to pay for me. And it became this kind of unspoken thing. But they, like my best friend, David, the best guy friend, and we would go out and he would just buy the drinks. It wasn't even, I didn't have to ask. There was no embarrassing. We talked about it in the beginning and he knew. And I just said, one day this is going to come back around. I promise you. And I remember literally when it was probably 3 years after college or 4 years after college, when I came back to the US, after living in Europe for 3 years, I called him up and I met him for lunch. And I had borrowed some money in the beginning. I paid him his money back and I paid for lunch. And that was like, thank you for everything that you did. Right. And so you don't forget the people who he made my college days not just bearable, but enjoyable, because I was able to do things that financially I wouldn't have been able to do had he and some other friends not been willing to kind of flip the bill for me.
Right. It's so cool to see how people rally around one another and, you're able to continue on a trajectory towards success because of the kindness of others. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we get out of college and what happens next?
I moved to England to do my master's and to coach volleyball and softball, college volleyball and softball team. Okay. And I start playing for a Premier League volleyball team in England. I get recruited to go play pro in Belgium. So this is 3 years of not even coming back to the US and just living my life. And again, it's the first time I actually had my own money now, right? Mm-hmm. So that in that pro job, not only did I get my own money, but I had a car and I had an apartment, and I'm in Belgium, and I'm just kind of thriving because I now have the means to do things. There was something like growing up, I didn't realize we were poor when we were little, right? And then when we started working, you knew you were poor, but this is just what you did. You survived. And it was the first time that I realized, that I didn't have to just like wish for things and I didn't have to have the hand, like I could actually do something for myself. And I actually started saving when I was working in Belgium. When I was playing volleyball, there was a little bit too much time on my hands. And so they said I needed to work. And I started working on, there's a theme here, you see. Right. I started to work at the military base as a substitute teacher. And it's actually how I discovered that I was naturally a teacher. But they paid us in US dollars and I couldn't use US dollars. So that money just got sent home. And so while I was there for that 3 years, I was able to build a little, stash of money that just sat there. And when I came back home in 1991, I had a bank account that it wasn't, a lot of money, but it was enough to get me started. Yeah. And again, this idea, and I can't say that had I been paid in in
That you would have
Gilbers
saved
or
a
whatever,
penny
that I
of
would
it.
have saved a penny of it. So I'm not saying I knew my lesson there, but the universe just has this magical way of providing, right? And that was it. It's like there was nothing I could do. It was not easy to cash, and so it just had to go into the bank, and that was it. And so when I got home, 2 years later, there was money in the bank.
A series of fortunate events is what we're going to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It is, it's, I do believe it's like this, the universe conspiring for our success by, if I don't fight it, I am creating, it creates pathways for me that if I follow, then I'm going to end up where I'm supposed to be. And I sincerely believe that.
Were there any financial failures that you suffered along the way, that anything that happened to you that?
Yeah, I have one, but the bigger thing I will say is that there's this thing, I remember Oprah talking about it years and years ago, about a poor mentality, right? About being poor for so long that when she started to make money, that she still had this poor mentality. And I could really relate to that. Of the more money I made, the more money I spent. Right. It wasn't. So when I got my first job, back here, it was 12,000 a year. I thought I was doing something, and and I was surviving. I had to have a roommate. I was 20, 25, 24 years old. And then my next job was 24,000 a year. And I'm like, dang, I hit it. And then all of a sudden that's gone and I have to work an extra shift. And the next job was, 40,000 a year. And so because I didn't really have any education around money and investing and things like that, that I, the more I made, the more I spent. It was just, and it was accumulating junk. And I really attribute that to this poor mentality of, now I can get those things. Now I can have those things without realizing that those things weren't really necessary to make me whole. But I almost feel like that when you grow up that poor, that there is a moment or a space of time where you have to kind of, like, you're feeding that child who always wanted something, who didn't get to have, like, literally I had Christmases and birthdays with not a single gift. So, it's kind of like feeding that desire to have things. So my failure would be, I guess, one of them on hindsight is I bought my first place when I was 29, which was really, again, a village, right? Making it happen. And I was in there for 5 years. It doubled its price. And I remember my friend specifically telling me, do not sell this place. Do not, it was in Pacific Beach, a mile away from the ocean. He's like, do not sell this place. And I saw the dollar signs,
like, I'm cashing out.
And I cashed out. And so I bought another house, but I put all that money in there. And because, again, I didn't have that financial information, I didn't realize that I could actually put take out money from the house I owned and rent that out and use that money. And I didn't have to sell it to do it. I just like, oh, I just made $80,000, So, I not so much a failure as a really intense lesson, right? This lesson of really slowing down and making sure that I have the information. One of the things that I strive to do now in my life, outside of the work that I do, my work is educating, right? Educating adults, educating kids, supporting particularly marginalized groups of kids who are in alternative ed and things like that. And my thing is, how do I support you to be your best self? And that includes what I would call financial literacy. So I've actually created a course on financial literacy just to help our kids, understand, like, what is a checking account? What is interest? All these things. If it seems too easy and it seems too good, it probably is. And so how not to make sure that our kids are locked up in debt before they even start living their lives. Right. Because I didn't have any of that. And literally up until I was in my 40s is when I started to finally figure it out, it's only been, I'm 55. And I would say that it's only been, 6 years that I don't have to balance my checkbook every day. Right. So it took me a while to kind of really get it, and I would get ahead. So I've made mistakes. And failures are interesting. It's interesting terminology, because the mistakes that I made really they helped me, right? They helped me grow. They helped me learn. And some of them are painful. I think the biggest lesson out of all of them is trust my instincts. So when something, and also it's okay for me to change my mind, right? Those are kind of my two lessons, because I think sometimes we make a commitment to something, whether it's financial, like I invested in building a house in Arizona. It was where I was going to live when I came back from Europe out in 07. I moved back there for a little bit, and the market was starting to turn. I didn't understand the market, and I invested at the high and before it crashed. And my gut was saying, you know what, stop this process, just keep the land, don't build. But I felt obliged to the builder. I didn't want to let anybody down. I didn't want to be that Black girl who, backed out, who didn't do it. And I didn't want people, to, like, the decisions that I made based on race, because I didn't want it to, because I feel like it's not just me. I feel like it impacts all, all Black people in my community. Like, I didn't want these white builders to have this bad idea about Black people, right? And so even though my gut was like, don't do it, I did it. And that it was a big mistake. I ended up, short selling my house and losing it.
As so many did during that time.
Yeah. Right. And it was unnecessary, though, if I would have just paid attention, and so we have that intelligence inside of us, and we just got to trust our instincts.
Yeah, I love that. You said one of the guiding principles, it's okay to change your mind. I think that is definitely something that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
To say like, never mind. No, thank you. Not anymore. This no longer aligns or resonates with what I'm trying to accomplish or do. So
exactly.
So how are you talking? Well, actually, before we go there, you mentioned kind of there being a pivoting point at age 40. Is there an actual event that happened, or what was the kind of process of like, okay, I need to start getting my money life together? And what did it look like to kind of learn and get yourself on track financially in the last 15 years?
Yeah, it really had to do with me being willing. So I chose the career of an educator, and unfortunately, education does not pay a lot of money. I worked as a university professor where I'm required to have a doctorate, and I'm making $55,000 a year living in California, and I have to have a roommate to keep my house. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so that
I can't make sense
either. Yeah, I see. You're like, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. And so, one of the pivots for me was like, I think in order for me to make money and do the work that I am called to do, I have to move into the private sector. And that was a very hard decision, because I believe in the public sector. Like, I want the public sector to succeed. I want our kids in public education to get the very best that they can. But if I'm literally like starving, I felt like here I am back again as a 12-year-old, struggling to pay bills and not being able to, do anything, that I finally had to leave. So I quit my university position and joined a private company doing work around DE&I, and really, figuring out, like, I learned the one thing, ups and downs, right? The one thing I learned about the private sector that never dawned on me was that, like, they can furlough you and they can just cut your pay. Like, this is stuff in education that doesn't exist. So there is that level of stability. Like, you're only going up. They're never going to cut your pay. You may get furloughed, but that's a different story. Right. And so going into the private sector, the possibilities to earn are so much more. And there is one thing, though, when I was teaching, the county office offered VALIC as an investment option for a 403B. And I was like, what is that? And I remember the guy, he was a young guy, and he came and talked to us all, and I asked questions, and I was just like, I just can't invest. I'm barely making it right now. I can't invest money. And we became friends, and he hounded me, Chris. He was like, Nancy, invest. He goes, even if it's $100, you will be surprised. It's pre-tax dollars. Like, who knew about pre-tax? Like, who knew about all, I didn't know any of that stuff. He's like, just do it for me. Just do it, $100. And you know what? And it was his his kind of like relentless, hounding of me that I finally started doing $100 every pay period, right? It was $100 every pay period. And then I started to see that actually I ended up with a little bit more money because this money was coming out because it put me down below this, whatever that, threshold was.
Right.
And then I started increasing it. And then I started, and then by the end of 5 years, I was maxing out my 403B.
Yes.
Do you know what? And again, the village, like here's this like 20, he's probably about 5 years older than me. We're just friends. But we're friends. We're actually spending time together, hanging out. And he's like, girl, you need to get your money invested in this. This is something that, you can borrow against it. And I can't tell you. So I was 29 when I started that. I probably borrowed against that 403B 3 times, all 3 times to buy houses. I pay myself back. They get 2%. I pay back at 7%. So I'm paying myself back at 5% interest, and I'm building my portfolio. Mm-hmm. Like those are the things that are so simple. So I'm like, I do little things with the kids I work with. It's like, you start with a penny, do a penny, and then 2 pennies the next day, and then 3 pennies, and it's like whatever it takes, but just put the money away. And we think we get into this mindset when you don't know better that you can't afford it. And the truth is you can't afford not to.
Amen. You cannot afford not to. And I think you bring up such a good point about the idea of like everyone being, well, not everyone, but people often being put in a situation where they have to choose, what their heart is telling them, what their passion is, but their passion not paying. So like the good works don't pay. And so now I'm having to choose to either continue in this work that I love to my own detriment, or leave the work that I love, or try to figure out another way to be able to do the work that I love, in, like you said, the private sector, or in a way that is going to allow me to earn for myself. Because why should anyone have to struggle just because they want to help others?
Yeah, it's true. Absolutely. Yeah. And so, if I had any message for anyone, it's like, lean into entrepreneurship, like go out and if you have a good idea, try it. You can do it on the side. It can be a side hustle for a minute, but there are far more benefits if you can find your niche to make money and get out of survival mode. And that was the thing for me, like 45, moving into the private sector and then starting my own business in 2015 and realizing that, it was a struggle, believe me. That first year I was like, I think I was making more as a university professor, but which is cray, but really the earning potential is exponential. Right. And then really your hard work, you can see direct benefits from the effort that you're putting in. And so, within 3 years, my company was profitable and continues to grow. Now I have, 12 employees. So, which is from me doing everything. I remember doing a video, I was trying to get grant money and they wanted to have you introduce them to your team. And so I literally sat in front of my computer like this. And I was like, hi, I'm Nancy Dome, and I'm the CEO founder. And then I would change my shirt and put my hair up, my dreads at that time in a bun. And I'm like, hi, I'm Nancy Dome, and I'm the webmaster. And I did that. Hi, I'm Nancy Dome. I'm the HR department. Hi, I'm Nancy Dome. I'm the copywriter. I'm marketing. And so I did. I thought it was funny. I didn't get the grant, but I enjoyed the process. But literally being every single thing and having to learn every skill, but then also being ready when the time came to, okay, now it's time for an expert. So like now I've got a real accounting firm who handles my money, who handles my payroll, who handles all that. And again, they're still teaching me. Like I called up asking, I'm like, I don't understand this. When you say it's a pass through, what does that mean for an S corp? Like, what does that mean? Why am I paying this much money in taxes? It's like that, still learning. Yes. But having someone who has, an immense amount of financial information and knowledge and willing to sit down with me and say, okay, this is what this means, so that I understand what I'm doing. Because I literally, I'm an educator. I never thought I would own a business. It was not a goal. I just kind of took advantage of things as they presented themselves. And so there was a lot for me to learn about owning a business and running a business.
Yes, and I think you bring up a really good point about the idea of like just calling and asking the people that
Yeah.
are around you or the people
Yeah.
that you employ that, no question is a dumb question. Like it is their job not to enable you to take things off your plate, but to better educate you so that you know
Yeah.
what's going on. Like, what does this mean?
Yes.
Because there's so many narratives out there too, especially about like exactly what you said. What does it mean to be a pass through? Everybody's like, oh, I got to set up an LLC because I'm gonna save money on taxes. Like, the LLC
Yeah.
actually doesn't. Like the S corp can, but you also have to consider these other things. And
Yes.
like you said,
Yes.
they don't actually understand the inner workings of it. They've just heard something about it, and they want, give me this thing, this S corp, so that I can. So I really appreciate that about you saying like, hey, I called and I asked, and
Yeah.
break it down for me because I need to understand.
Absolutely. And
Um,
that wasn't like I said. I mean, I'm going in my 7th year of business, and this was a conversation I had last year. So just, it's
Learning every
real.
day.
Every day. Every day.
So
Oh,
you've written a book that's called Let's Talk About Race and Other Hard Things. And you've talked a lot about money on this podcast, and it is one of those hard things. How are
yeah.
you talking to the people around you right now about money and as it pertains to, race and money, or just, what are the conversations being had in your environment right now?
Yeah, so the book is based off of a framework called compassionate dialogue, right? And it's the idea is like, how do we have these difficult conversations and do it with compassion? And so some of them is like interrupting, a deficit narrative or something like that. But some of it is also, we've been conditioned in society not to talk about, money or religion or politics, even though the politics has kind of fallen off to the wayside, right? But this idea that these are not conversations that are had, but they're some of the most important aspects of our life. And the fact that no one talked about money was extremely impactful for me, and I had to figure it all out. And so, like I said, one of the things that I did was create a financial literacy, and it initially started off as a class for kids, right, that I taught my kids, but now I'm packaging it for adults, because I there are so many teachers who were just like me, who don't, they're just kind of surviving. They're working really hard, they're getting their money, but they're not taking advantage of the district's office, 403B plan or 401k plan, because they think they can't afford to. And so literally I've written a course. It's in still in draft kind of beta form, but written a course that I'm trying to figure out, how do I market this to educators, to let them know that they can do more, they can have more. And some people already have that knowledge, but it's surprising how many people really don't.
Yeah, it is so important. And I think we always, especially as entrepreneurs, are like, oh, this already exists out there somewhere. Why am I creating it? Why recreate the real wheel sort of thing? But, there's an audience out there that is specific to you and a set of people that you are called to be able to reach. I've been having that conversation with myself on a regular basis as I try to get
Yeah.
ready for 12-week programs and courses and things like that. That
Yeah.
there's so many, 330 million Americans out there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And most of us don't have the information we need. So like the protocols recognize, interrupt, and repair. And so it really gets you in this idea of like, okay, what is it that I want to change? What is it that I want to do? That's to recognize the interrupt. Is that, then how do I change it? How do I lean in and start having the conversations and figuring it out? So on an organizational level, it would be like, how, if there's something that I want to like, or I should say not organizational, intrapersonal, like I want to increase my financial knowledge and understanding. And so the interrupting is really about leaning in and finding those people, what is it that what that I need to know, who is the best person to talk to. And I think being willing to be vulnerable is crucial to, because that, essentially means that I have to admit that I don't know what I don't know, I don't even know what I don't know. I'm
right.
really in that place. And so how do I, not be afraid of, letting my ignorance show, and understand that, for me, ignorance is not, when someone says, oh, you're ignorant, I'm like, well, that's better than like willfully not wanting to learn, right? Being in
Right.
denial. Ignorance means that I just haven't been exposed to it yet. And I'm ignorant of a lot of things, but that can change with energy put toward it. And so, when we talk about the protocol and how we interrupt this kind of this narrative about finances. It really is about being willing to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I don't know, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? And I think we'd be surprised to find how many people are willing to lend a hand to help, help us.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And I think you bring up a really good point about the idea of ignorance. It has such a negative connotation, but the actual word is, like you said, just I don't know. Like, it doesn't mean that you're not willing to know, that you don't want to know. Is this you just have not been exposed to that information. So
that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Gosh, this has been such a wonderful conversation. We are headed to what I like to refer to as the final sprint.
Okay.
And so I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions. You can go ahead and say whatever you want.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. You've got $20 in your pocket right now. What do you spend it on?
I don't spend it.
Ooh, put it in your pocket. Keep it there.
Just keep it there. Yeah.
Yes. I'm here for it. Finish this sentence. That awkward financial moment when?
Oh, when you go to pay for something and your card's declined.
Right. That is definitely awkward moment. You're like, put all this stuff back.
And you don't know where you're going to get it from. I mean, I had those days, trying to put gas in the car. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Something you do for fun that doesn't cost anything.
Hike. I love being in nature. Yeah. Or kayaking, just being out and doing what I can.
I love it. I love it. Worst advice you've ever received.
Worst advice. Oh, okay. I know it's supposed to be rapid fire. I'm trying to think about that one though. The worst advice. I don't know that I've ever had really bad advice. I can't think of the worst advice.
That's a good problem to have. All right.
Yeah.
You got best advice for us?
But best advice really was when my high school teacher told me, because my sister and I were extremely competitive with each other, and she always was a little better at things than I was as far as sports. And she said, she's like, you know what, you keep competing with her, but it's not a competition. She said, your sister's on her own journey, and you're going to find that actually not having the attention is going to take you not necessarily further, but that was kind of her message in high school. And I remember it gave me permission to kind of just stop competing with her and realize, it took us a while to realize that we were on the same team. We were way too competitive, but it was really good advice to just stop me feeling, jealous and angry about all the attention she was getting, and realize that I was on a different journey.
I love that. To be able to redirect that energy in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Last but not least, what is one thing you would like to improve about your personal finances in the upcoming year?
I'm actually finally in the position where I can invest. And so, my accountant was like, you need to diversify. And so I'm taking a step now and buying my first commercial building. And so, really getting to a place where I can create, empire sounds a little lofty, but that's kind of what I'm trying to do. It's like I'm trying to create something, a legacy, and model for other people that start from nothing, that this is possible. And I don't want to just say that all you need to do is work hard, because I think that that's a myth that gets in our way. But this idea that, you still got to work towards something. You gotta have a dream in order to move forward. And so that's my goal for this year, is to invest some of my money to make money. And let me put it this way. I would like to have passive revenue where I'm not working as hard as I have to work. And I've always worked to have, to earn money.
What is the key action item that you need to implement to make all of that come to fruition?
It's kind of leaning in and taking risk, and again, asking for help. I reached out to a college friend who is a contractor, and I was like, can I interest you in a trip to Montana for a week? And he's like, why? And I said, because I'm buying a commercial building, and I need, I trust you, and I need you to look and bring your vision and also to interview contractors, help me interview contractors, because, being a Black woman in Montana, I don't always feel like I get like the respect that I deserve. And, so I got this big white guy who's gonna, come and kind of play the middleman for me. And for me, being willing to ask and say, like, I know that this is not my strength, so I'm going to bring in somebody to do that. And the fact that he said yes, I mean, he's out here, and why is he coming? Because we have a history. And I think that, so I'm going to finish on this, and I know I'm taking a lot of time. I'm so sorry, but I want to say, so I was with the coach, Rich Lippin, and he's a CEO coach. And the one thing he said was, in our coaching session, he's like, this month in November, you're collecting no's. And I was like, what is that? He goes, basically, you're going to ask for the most, it's outrageous October. You collect as many no's as you can. And the whole purpose of that lesson is, can I tell you, I couldn't get anybody to say no to me. And I thought I was asking for outrageous things. And the lesson really was that you're not asking for enough, that people are willing to give and support you if you ask them. And so the most outrageous thing that I started asking for, and people were like, of course, yeah, I'll do that for you. Right. And so I do an outrageous October all the time. I do it, like, for me, it's like ask to collect no's. And then you can't be disappointed because you're actually trying to get a no. Right. So when someone rejects you, I do that in quotes, then you're like, okay, cool, I got it,
Right.
But I did not get one single no.
Oh my
for the
goodness.
whole month. And so I think that's my bigger message, is that, like, don't be afraid to ask for what you need.
Talk about, like, manifesting into your life, like, boldly going and asking and getting the things that you want by just simply saying, being audacious enough to say, like, hey, can I have this thing?
Yes.
That's a great message. I need to take that immediately and put it into practice.
Yes. Let me know how it goes, because I tell you, it's changed my life. Literally, that one activity has changed my life.
This has been so excellent. I would love if you could now stand on the podium. We are done with the final sprint. You have won. Here is your worth listening medal. You made it. This is your time to shine. So go ahead and shout yourself out. Tell us how we can support you, where we can find you, anything you want the audience to know.
Yes, please. So I have a new book that came out last week. It hit #1 on the first day in all 4 categories. It's called Let's Talk About Race and Other Hard Things. And so, of course, checking out the book would always help. My website is drnancydome.com, drnancydome.com. And so you can check me out and just see what I'm doing and what I'm up to. I do keynotes, I do coaching, things like that. And it's all about just supporting us to be in our power, and using compassionate dialogue as our tool to navigate, whether it's personal or professional, just really show up in our truth.
Nancy, it has been so great talking to you. I can't wait to check out the book.
Yeah.
I will be reporting back to the audience.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed spending this time with you, and just, we don't get to talk about money and our experiences with it and how it shaped us. So I thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for what you do to make it public, to bring this awareness to the public.
We've all got to find a way to be able to do our part to make the impact that we feel is necessary to change the world. So let's continue to do it.
Let's do it. Hey.